everybody. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Emma Turner, and my co-host, John Hutchinson. Hi, John.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm very, very, very excited because I've got one of my favourite social media and education superstars, Dan Wuori, on the line today. So hello, Dan. Welcome.
Hi, Emma. Hi, John. It's great to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, I'm absolutely delighted to have you on here. John quoted you as when I said we were going to get you on, he said he's got the most positive social media presence I have seen anywhere, and I can 100% concur there. Your social media is a delight, as is your latest writing. But for those colleagues in the UK who might not have stumbled across your work to date, just give us a little flavour of what you're all about, Dan, what your work is, and how you've become to be known as the most positive person on social media.
Well, the most positive person on social media might be kind of a low bar, Emma. So I don't know about that, but I have had the good fortune to be working in the early years sector now for more than 30 years. I began my career sort of by accident as a fill-in in an hourly childcare program that was run by a family friend. She was short-staffed one day. I was actually working in broadcasting at the time, was working in radio, had completed my bachelor's degree in journalism, and good family friend called and was in a bind and asked if I could come and fill in one afternoon at this after school program. And so that very afternoon, without any pre-planning, I found myself in a classroom full of 5 and 6-year-olds and just fell in love with early childhood education that day. I realized that I had made a terrible mistake in my career path, and so I immediately pursued going back to graduate school. Since then, served as a public school kindergarten teacher, as a school district administrator, leading early childhood programs. I had the good fortune for almost 14 years to help to lead the state of South Carolina's early childhood education agency, which is called First Steps. And then here more recently founded the early childhood policy work at a place called the Hunt Institute, which is located in the state of North Carolina, also on the eastern seaboard of the United States. And the institute is the brainchild of a man named Jim Hunt, who was the 4-term governor of the state of North Carolina, and is an education policy support to the nation's governors and state legislators. And so really for the past 5+ years, my work has been primarily in the early childhood policy space. I've traveled across the United States, supporting governors and state lawmakers in crafting early childhood policy, that'll be good for kids and families. And so, that's, I've had this wonderful opportunity to kind of increase the scale of my impact over my career. Having begun in a classroom full of teaching kids to read, and expanding that to the district, to the state, national, and now here we are. Talking with you in the UK, and so it's that has happened. In part, as you mentioned, because of this social media presence. I have been a Twitter user. My wife would say Twitter addict for many years, and began that process really writing a lot about the policy work that I was doing, uplifting laws that had been passed in individual states, for example, and very, very policy focused. But it was around that around, I don't know, 2.5 years ago that I started just regularly running across these amazing videos, in some cases that had gone really viral, of young children doing what I think they had gone viral because they were doing really adorable things in a lot of ways. But I looked at them through very different eyes, I think, in hindsight. As I was studying now more than 30 years ago to become a kindergarten teacher, and first, sort of exploring the topic of child development myself. Everything I learned about child development, I more or less had to read in a book, right? If you were lucky, there was a model program or something at a university that you could go and kind of, peek through a window for 30 minutes and sort of, see what actual kids were doing. But I think, even a lot of early childhood teachers have to learn a fair amount about child development, and certainly the same for parents on the job, right? As they get, whether it's, children of their own, or children in a professional setting. And so it just struck me that, wow, there's, so many amazing examples of these concepts that I was learning about, decades ago, in the child development space floating around online. So, my social media really took off when I started sort of matching some of these videos that are, kind of out in the public, online, with some analysis of them from a child development perspective, and have had the opportunity to say, yeah, look at this, it's adorable, but it's a lot more than just adorable. It's showing this, amazing aspect of early development, for example. And boy, to say that has taken off and garnered some attention would be an understatement. It has taken me very much by surprise, but it's become very, very popular. And to your point about the positivity, I definitely do prioritize. You'll never see a video posted where I say, hey, you see this parent here, here are these things that I wish they had done differently. Instead, these are all really great examples of, amazing aspects, but not unique aspects, incidentally, of child development. I'm not uplifting these videos because these individual children or these individual families are doing something that isn't very common, and what many parents might see in their own homes. But you definitely do try to honor them and uplift the great things that are happening there.
I always love seeing your posts, Dan, for two reasons. One, they are, like you say, absolutely adorable. But then I love your very detailed expert commentary of exactly what's happening, because I think those little bite-sized chunks just serve to highlight the importance of really understanding as an educator, regardless of what stage you're at in terms of your career or what age children you teach. It really highlights the importance of understanding where it all starts and how it all starts. And every baby, every child is adorable. Every parent thinks they've got the greatest child in the world. So it's really nice that you say none of them are particularly unique. They are recognizable. And I know that, John, you really enjoy Dan's posts as well.
So it was a moment in time, Dan, because I've got a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, and so I feel like for the last 3 years, you don't know it, but you've been my personal parenting coach, and
So kind.
The amount of just recently with my son, who is 1, and he's got into the habit recently when we're reading of just going absolutely wild with the pages, and so we do not get and that started happening. So I'm reading I want my hat back, whatever, and he sort of goes back 3 pages and then back forward, and in my head I remember your tweet came up, Dan, saying this is okay, like look at what a great job this dad is doing by just going with what his son's doing and just sort of like asking him, oh, okay, we're going back to that page, okay, let's read that bit again. And I think that it's such an innovative service, I think, to parents and to educators, because it's kind of superpower to be able to provide that kind of analysis of what's going on. Because on the surface, as you say, on the surface, it seems relatively sort of run of the mill. This is an interaction. This is a child doing something that children do, or an adult interacting with a child. And yet there is just such complexity going on in terms of what's happening in the child's brain and body, and also how the adult is doing that. I think you just can't underestimate the power of that. I'm not surprised it's gone stratospheric, because the power of that is just huge.
Wow, that's very, very kind, John. I'm just soaking that in for a moment. But you're absolutely right. These are the things. It's funny. One of the things I wrote about recently here is this idea that that all new parents are just that, right? Whether you're an early childhood educator, I will tell you, I'm married to another early childhood educator. My wife and I were both teaching kindergarten at the time our firstborn was born, and yet graduate degrees and experience with young kids aside, like we felt as completely overwhelmed bringing home a newborn baby for the first time as everyone feels that way. Pediatricians are new parents, at some level, and so it's just. Hopefully it has been a service, will continue to be a service to parents to lift this up. But then also I think to the question of the rest of my work, the work that maybe people don't see quite as publicly, I think has very important implications for what we do in our public policy.
Mm. My personal favorite, just as an aside before we go, is the baby on the piano, the baby listening to the parent play the piano. Absolutely gorgeous. But your work on the policy work, I was reading, because you've got a new book coming out. I don't know whether it's out in the US. It's just about to come out over here, The Daycare Myth. Um, and John and I have both read it, both been completely blown away by it, because in it you really unpack the importance of a child's early experiences and interactions with adults, but also the challenges and barriers to potentially accessing and providing that provision.
The book, Emma, I see very much as a companion to what I'm doing on social media. And some of my social media followers may be a little surprised, may have expected that this book was going to be more of a sort of a developmental book, more parenting advice. And what the book actually is sort of an exploration of the disconnect between what we know from the science of early development, the things that I've been so focused on social media, and how we enact that, or at least here in the United States, often don't well enact that into our public policy. For example, here in the U.S. at precisely the time that we know that newborn babies most need stable, nurturing interactions during those first weeks and months of life, where attachment is created, and the foundations of our lifelong mental health are taking root. What we find is that attachment is frequently interrupted, and in many cases interrupted over and over again. We have 1 in 4 mothers in this country that has to return to work within 2 weeks of giving birth, if you can believe that. We have an early childhood field that is so poorly compensated and so poorly respected in many regards, that we have, turnover of about 40% annually out of those classrooms. And so, at precisely the time that young children need these stable, nurturing relationships, we are, interrupting that process, and in some cases giving them kind of a revolving door of adult relationships, in some cases with adults who are ill prepared or so new to the process that they are struggling through it themselves. And so the book really sort of puts those things side by side, looks at what we know about all of the amazing development that is happening, and sort of critiques the system we have and envisions a better way, not only for children and families, but for taxpayers.
Because you talk in the book as well about these 3 simple truths. I think that'd be really helpful I shall not destroy them by trying to explain them really badly myself. I'll let you explain those. But you talk about these 3 simple truths that are really important for everybody to know when we're talking about the development of younger children, don't you?
I do, and so in the first chapter of the book, I mean, it sort of make the case for why, why this is an important period. And these three simple truths are my effort to distill really decades and in all fairness, not original to my work. This is the lessons I think we have learned across decades of important scientific research. The first of those is that learning begins in utero and never stops. And I think that that is a real eye-opener unto itself. I think, very frequently here in the United States, I am speaking with policymakers who express the goal that they want children to come to kindergarten as 5-year-olds, quote unquote, ready to learn, as though that is where learning begins. And we know very conclusively at this point that, that is not where learning begins. We know that learning is happening not only from day one, but that we increasingly understand through this amazing and emerging body of evidence that there are some important forms of learning that begin even in utero. That, for example, that, during the final weeks of pregnancy, as children's hearing activates, that they begin absorbing and organizing their cognition around the rhythms and the patterns of their mother's native language. And so that, that as newborn babies, they already express a preference not only for their mother's voice, but for her native language, and can distinguish, between her native language and foreign languages. Their brains light up in different ways. And so, that is the first of these truths, and that's a very different way of thinking about the early years. I want to get to the title of the book here, but let me finish the three truths. So the first is this idea that learning begins in utero and never stops. The second is that the period from prenatal to age 3 is the single most consequential window in all of human development. It is the time during which the fundamental architecture, the kind of metaphorical wiring of our brains occurs in ways that will go on, ideally, to support our long-term success, not only in school, but in life. And so, it's hard to overstate the importance of that, that 45-month period from conception until the third birthday. That's not to suggest that, important things aren't happening developmentally after age 3 as well. But boy, is that a time to focus on getting things right in the first place. And then the third of these truths really looks at the question of, so, if that's true, how do we optimize that early brain development, and highlights the fact that, as I already mentioned here, that that early brain development is really optimized through stable, nurturing relationships with highly engaged adults in the lives of children. And so many of the video examples we're talking about, illustrate just that. For example, what we call serve and return interactions, where a parent and a baby are, sort of together face to face, and even before children are speaking conventionally, that their parents are mimicking the sounds they make, and engaging in kind of conversational turns. That children need that and thrive on those important one-on-one interactions. And so the book sort of asks the question around, if we know these three things to be true from the science, how does that stack up against the systems that we have for young children? And you maybe won't be surprised to know, the book has to conclude as, John, to your point of, my social media presence being very positive. People have pointed out to me that the title of the book, the full title, is The Daycare Myth: What We Get Wrong About Early Care and Education and What We Should Do About It. And fair to say that is deliberately a little bit of a provocative title, and a little bit less positive than the my social media presence, and very planfully and deliberately so, because it, it is an effort to say, you know, here's what we know on the one hand, and here's how we're failing to enact it on the other. And so the title, the Daycare Myth, um, speaks to what I think is sort of the fundamental problem in our field right now, which is that, at least here in the United States, though I will say as an aside, I'm finding that things are not terribly different in the UK. The more I have this conversation, at least here in the United States, we have very long sort of conceptualized daycare, or more recently, we've done a better job calling it childcare, but we have conceptualized this care a concept as that young children need sort of care and supervision, whereas older children get involved in learning. And we know from this conversation about the three truths that that's just not the case. And so we have 100-year history here in the United States of investing ostensibly in childcare in ways that are ultimately really about the workforce participation of adults, and very much not about the optimal development of young children. And I think fair to say, the workforce participation question is an important one. It's a worthy and a notable public policy goal unto itself. But I think, some of the point that the book is trying to raise is that we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that this investment is really an investment in children in the way that it is configured currently.
That Dan, that really chimed with me as I was reading the Daycare Myth, which I thought was excellent. Was surprised at the number of parallels, not and some that weren't. As you say, made me feel grateful for the shared parental leave entitlement here, although I grumble about it. Made me grateful for some of the entitlements. The line that I think punched me in the gut the most from the book was, all environments are learning environments for young children. It was a light bulb moment for me. So we can't pretend that there's this kind of either we're looking after them or providing kind of education or learning. If you're looking after them, then they're learning in that environment. And the question is what you want them to be learning or how. The other part that jumped out, which I'd love for you to share a little bit about, is you share some sort of pitfalls, some ways not to try and address this issue. And I'm glad you're ringing this alarm bell, because I think it is same in the US and the UK. We're increasingly aware of both the financial and the moral kind of issue with not being proactive and providing young children with the support and development that they need. And yet, when I read your policy pitfalls, I thought, I think I've seen all of those proposed by government to try and solve just in the last 18 months. I think I may have seen all of those proposed.
Like a bingo card. Got.
So can you talk a little bit about how we're kind of not going to solve this problem, or things to avoid?
Absolutely. Well, and you're right. So the book, just to sort of help listeners to conceptualize. So the book, across 5 major chapters, first introduces this, a little bit about what we know from the science of early learning. The next chapter makes really the economic case for why this is important, not only for young children and their families, but for all of us as taxpayers and interested participants in society. Third chapter kind of unpacks the crisis that we are having in childcare here in the country. And then, the final 2 chapters look at a future that we might envision. The final chapter itself really looking kind of ahead at some proactive things that we might be doing differently. But the other chapter there really unpacking as John, you mentioned pitfalls or, areas even in the book that I, equate to being like public policy malpractice, almost ways that state and federal policy here in the United States are not only not helping to make the situation better, but may, with all the best of intentions in some cases, be sort of actively undermining the success of the sector. One of those is that, there has been a temptation here in the United States to expand our preschool offerings. I know there's a little translation. Am I right in thinking this is nursery programs? And so I'm talking about programs for 3 and 4 year olds primarily here in the United States. And as states have looked to expand that investment, one of the ways they have done it is by relying maybe a little bit too heavily on our public school system to provide that service. So tacking an extra grade level onto the nation's public school systems. And the book uplifts the fact that, historically, at least here in the States, early childhood services have really not been the domain of the public school system. Instead, we have had this, rich environment, this sort of ecosystem of, private childcare programs, of church preschools, of our Head Start programs. It's a very rich, diverse, service delivery network. And, the economics of childcare are such, both here and there, that it is incredibly costly to provide services, in particular to infants, right? That we know that infant care is just so labor intensive and so costly that really left to the free market, that almost no family could, other than, perhaps the very wealthiest families could reasonably afford that. Here in the United States, in most states, infant care as it is costs more than attending a public university, costs more than our housing costs in many cases. And so it's already a terrifically expensive service. But for providers, it's, very difficult, if not impossible, for them to even break even on the provision of that service. And so, economically, our preschool programs rely very heavily on the presence of older preschoolers, 3 and 4 year olds, that can be served in larger numbers and therefore maybe a little more profitable and can help to offset that loss from infant toddler care. And so the danger, at least here in the States, that we have seen is that when public school systems start saying, oh, okay, well, we'll start serving 4 year olds, the threat there is that all of those, more profitable children are siphoned off of the private and community-based sector that has been providing this service for so many decades, and really has the potential to destabilize the availability even of infant care, and destabilize, frankly, even their ability to remain in operation. And so, one of those pitfalls has been looking too much to a strictly public approach to how we provide that service. That doesn't mean that couldn't work in theory, but I think it's much more complex than just saying, oh well, we're gonna pay for more services for 4 year olds without thinking about the unintended consequences for younger children. One of the other and I'd be surprised if you haven't seen this there in the UK, John and Emma, is there are states and newspaper editorials and policymakers who have basically said, look, this is a field that is in an economic crisis. They're struggling to keep their doors open. The problem here in their mind is that we have just over-regulated these programs in a way that, adds all of these extra burdens. And so the proposed solutions often are, not more investment, but why don't we strip away any sort of requirement that isn't related to children's very basic health and safety. If it's not a health and safety concern, then we should have, allow programs the ability to do this. That includes, by the way, in some cases, changing the teacher-child ratios, allowing many more children per teacher. In some cases here in the US, we've seen states move to allowing even younger teenagers to serve as lead teachers. Um, and it's, again, to this point of the title of the daycare myth, and this idea that this service exists just as a sort of a supervisory kind of custodial care service. It is this mindset that that this is really almost equivalent to like a holding facility for young children, right? That we need to keep them safe and warm and well fed, while their parents are at work, but really not conceptualized as a place that is designed to educate or to optimize early development. And the book really highlights the danger in looking at that approach, not only the danger to children's development, but the danger ultimately to all of us as taxpayers, because this is a what's the expression? What, penny wise, pound foolish, right? That ultimately we have a system here that is prioritizing meeting our very basic needs at what is ultimately the highest possible long-term cost to society, right? That we're, by failing to optimize development during the earliest months and years of life, that we are paying endlessly for the results of our failure during the earliest part of life, that we're paying more for remediation and retention in our K-12 education system, that we're paying more for special education, that we're paying more in adulthood for, in terms of reliance on social services and welfare programs. We're paying for what are worse health outcomes as adults. There's a fascinating body of evidence emerging around how our adult health is shaped by the experiences we have during early childhood, and even going so far as to, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that, that there is an impact on interactions even with our criminal justice system, right? That we're paying more for incarceration, for example, as a result of this. And so, the book sort of makes the case economically that we are already paying for the system that we actually need, if not more so. We're just doing it in all the dumbest possible ways, right? That we seem content to pay endlessly for the result of our approach to the early years, rather than say, what if we fixed the problem in the first place? What if we got kids off on the right foot in the ways that we know from all of this research will help to mitigate these long-term costs? And I don't know if you have them there in the UK. I'd be surprised if you don't. But here there is a very popular form of business that we call them payday loans, right? And so they're these little loan companies that can, on a short term for a month or something, can lend you $200, but at the end of the process you have to repay $300 a month later. And the book sort of makes the case that we are taking out at scale a payday loan on behalf of kids in a way that could ultimately save taxpayers a lot of money. And shrink, ultimately the size of our government, if we just got things right in the first place.
I love the phrase that you used, Dan,
Absolutely.
about hair being a low bar. Right, are you back, John? Are you back in the room? Okay, right, we'll go again. Okay, so Dan, the bit in the book that really resonated with me was when you talk about care being a low bar, because I'd never heard it expressed like that just caring for a child's very, very basic needs is not enough. And it made me really think that actually No, it isn't enough, because these young, very young children, infants, they can't advocate for themselves, and just having the very basics met isn't enough, and it's not enough to kind of to just do the basics. And so one of the other bits that then I kind of jumped backwards and forwards between the books was about the investment, the impact of investment in early education, as in the earlier you put the investment, the more economic, social sense it seems to make in terms of outcomes later on. I didn't know whether you could just kind of talk through that curve on that graph.
I will, and I'm so glad you raised this question about the idea of care being a low bar, because I want to be really, really clear here too. You know, when I am talking, what I'm talking about in the book is this idea of care as supervision, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. But I want to be really careful to distinguish that, because, you know, you'll note, you know, from the conversation we had earlier about the three simple truths, right? Those nurturing, stable interactions, you know, are also frequently identified using the word care. And that's definitely, you know, I mean, that nurturing sense of the word care is very, very much important and a part of the long-term solution. It's ultimately what, you know, what all children need. But this sense that, you know, that care, or, you know, in this case, childcare or daycare, is just this sort of safe, warm place where children can be kept while their children are at, you know, or where children can be kept while their parents are at work, is very much at odds with what we know. And that, in particular, is a very low bar, knowing what we know about the, you know, the early development of young children. Now, to the, you know, to the question of this being an investment, you know, I think there's the book tries to make the case that yes, in the short term, there is a cost associated with fixing this problem. There's really no way around that. But I think it's important to think of that cost as an investment and not just as a cost, because over time, what we know is that, you know, that this will actually yield very substantial returns to taxpayers. And what you're talking about, Emma, is a graphic in the book that was created by a man named James Heckman. Dr. Heckman is a Nobel Prize winning economist who worked previously at the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank and now at the University of Chicago. Dr. Heckman has dedicated much of his career to tracking the long-term return on investment associated with these high-quality investments in young children. And what he has created to sort of simplify that message is something called the Heckman curve, which is like I mean, it almost looks like, for lack of a better way of describing it, like a Nike swoosh, right? It has the, you know, kind of high end and goes down, and what it you know, what the Heckman curve shows us is that, you know, the highest yield investments for taxpayers are programs that serve children beginning the soonest, right? So, you know, programs that begin even with you know, mothers during pregnancy, children in utero, and then, you know, serving from there, yield of, you know, a very high return to taxpayers, as do, you know, programs then subsequently serving infants and preschoolers. But the, you know, the longer we wait to make that investment, the, you know, the lesser the return, in through Heckman's research. And what's ironic about it is, if we were to take, at least here in the United States, and overlay, you know, on that curve, a depiction of where we actually spend our money, you know, we would see almost like the opposite of that curve, that we spend a lot of, you know, public funding in our K-12, you know, public education system, and higher education, and, you know, university and job training, but comparatively very, very little in the, you know, the period from prenatal to age 5 in this country.
Mm.
And Dan, that can I pick up on that point, because
Sure.
you fiercely advocate here for well, mostly I think for small children who can't advocate for themselves. And I suppose, let's get political, let's get in trouble. This is a group that's easy to ignore. Policy decisions tend, I think both countries tend to be made by men, and often men who won't have interacted with young children in this way. And there seems to be this kind of, well, when kids get to about 5, then it's kind of the state's problem. We have to put some, but up until then anything's a bit of a bonus. Anything you get extra is sort of a bit of a bonus. Anything kids get extra is a bit of a bonus. Anything parents get are a bit of a bonus. So I guess that's my roundabout way of asking. It feels like there's a big, heavy lift to advocate and to drive forward this kind of alarm bell that you're ringing. And so how do we best do that? How do we best, even if everybody agrees this sort of makes sense and yet it's been ignored for so long, how do we best advocate for the kind of transformation that you argue for in the book?
That's a great question, and I guess my best answer is what you see me doing each day, which is I'm working on on the one hand to really raise public awareness of the importance of the early years, helping them to sort of transcend the cute label or the adorable label, and really trying to educate around just how powerful those years are, and just how much learning and important development happens there. But then it's a matter of taking that shifted mindset, and as parents, as early childhood professionals, reaching out, communicating that with policymakers. You both know from reading the book that the policymakers are not the only audience of the book, but an important audience in the book. And so, I think on the one hand, we need a better understanding. You know from reading it that the book just makes the case that we know that we're talking about a crisis in the compensation of the workforce, and we have a crisis in helping parents to access services, and we have a crisis of affordability. But the case that I'm making here is that fundamentally those are all a symptom of the larger crisis we are facing, which is a crisis of understanding. And that if the more we can do to help parents, to help policymakers to understand just how critical the decisions that we are making about young children during these early years are, that we have the potential to turbocharge our economies. We have the potential to better the economic and well-being of families. We have the potential to better prepare children for success in a global 21st century economy. And importantly, as I've mentioned here, we have the potential to save tax dollars, right? And so, even if you are a senior citizen who has no young children in your life currently, or maybe you are someone who has never had children, maybe doesn't intend to have children. And I sometimes see online people pose to me like, why I don't why should I pay for somebody else's children? Why does this matter to me? Right? That's the parent's responsibility. Well, that's really not the case, right? That we know that this has a bearing on healthcare costs and as I mentioned, criminal justice interactions, and dependence on social services in a way that is deeply impactful to all of us in society. And so the book tries very hard on a bipartisan basis to say, can we pause and talk about this, right? Can we no matter where you are on the political spectrum, I want you to recognize that there's an important case to be made here that will resonate with your worldview, right? There's, I am a really firm believer that investment in children and families ultimately has a strong case to be made, no matter where you fall on that political spectrum. So it's a matter, I think, John, of just helping to solve this crisis of understanding, getting the word out, and the book and the social media kind of go hand in hand in trying to accomplish that.
I don't think anybody could read it, Dan, and it not resonate in some way. Either I recognize that, or I want to do something about that, or I didn't realize that, So I think that as a kind of a rallying cry and an illuminating read, it's so important for anybody who's interested in either economics, politics, childcare, whatever your interest. There is definitely some aspect of it that will impact on your, like you say, on your worldview. But we've got to stop there, because I'm getting the nod from Luke that we are veering into overrunning territory, which I'm really cross about, because I want to talk to you for longer.
Well, let me mention one last thing, maybe, which is that I am coming your way.
I was going to ask you about that.
Next February and March, I will be bringing the message of the book very extensively throughout the UK and Ireland. Those dates are beginning to be announced, but we'll have a leg of that tour that will focus heavily on Ireland, Northern Ireland, and Scotland, and then we'll be back in the States for a week or so, and then we'll be traveling very extensively throughout England and Wales and down to Jersey, helping to spread this message. Including, I'm happy I can announce with you, these dates are going to be rolling out over the next couple of weeks, but very excited. I'll be speaking at the National Literacy Trust's Early Words Matter conference in London on March 19th, 2025. And so the good news is, if you'd like to hear more, talk more about this topic, I will be at enough stops in the UK that I guarantee I won't be more than an hour from you at any no matter where you are. So I'm looking forward to announcing all of those dates, and would love to see both of you while I'm there.
I'm flicking through his diary now.
I'll be there with bells on. But I'd also just think, I know that we have listeners from across the age spectrum here, from early years right up to primary, secondary, and university level. And I suppose on that last point, Dan, that you're making, I just encourage folks, whatever age of children that you teach, wherever you're involved in education, encourage folks to go along to see Dan, to start to solve this crisis of understanding. We all need to listen and learn. And so I hope that there are plenty of folks who teach the older children or are involved in the older children coming along to that as well.
Absolutely. If you teach older children, and I found this even as a kindergarten teacher of 5-year-olds, all of the challenges, whether it's literacy or social emotional development. I mean, all of what your students need, for example, to be successful at older grade levels, really find their roots during the years of infancy and toddlerhood. And so I couldn't agree with you more. This is an important topic, not just for teachers of young children, but for anyone with an interest in ultimately the well-being of our society.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's been an absolute joy and an illuminating conversation. I know that will resonate with so many people across the sector over here, and we cannot wait for you to come over here and spread the word about your work. And if in the interim people can read your book and visit your social media feeds, they are sure not to be disappointed, because, as John said at the very top, you are one of the most positive accounts to follow, positive work on important issues. So thank you for joining us, Dan. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your warmth, and I wish you all the very best for the launch of the book and for your tour.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to being with you in the UK.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you for listening to Mind the Gap. I'm Emma Turner and I've been presenting with my co-host John Hutchinson. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a review, share on social media and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on our YouTube channel by searching Mind the Gap with John and Emma, or head over to Spotify for an audio version. This podcast was produced in association with Haringey Education Partnership and our producer is Luke Kemper.